None that I know of. Certainly not in the Italian tradition, though we have a few documents that come to us. In particular, there's one interesting little riddle that it describes, it's sort of a what is this, and it describes the act of writing in a different, with metaphoric terms. So it talks about two oxen driving black furrows across a white field. What is it? And so it's a riddle. It's a riddle for writing. But no, I think this is precisely the point that I was making earlier. Love poems, love literature, fabliaux, the little fables, all of that sort of vernacular literature was really a product of an oral tradition in the Middle Ages. It's not really until 1200s, 1300s, 1200s in particular, that we see love poetry being recorded as a written document as opposed to a sung document that would be passed on through a troubadour-type tradition. So it's not surprising that we don't find such things. On the other hand, by the 1300s, when Petrarch starts writing his Canzoniere, which is this giant book of love, that it should appear in a written form is not surprising, because although he calls it a songbook, he's acutely aware of the fact that he is producing a written document. So tied up in the issue of what exists on parchment, what exists on vellum, etc., is really that question of value. What was given value? And as the Italian language emerges, the vernacular emerges as a written language, we see that it is much more valued. And that's again why I come back to those placiti, which are fascinating because they capture something in a written form that would not otherwise be preserved. And that's the status of the Italian language prior to the 1200s. And it's written there simply because it's testimony. And even in that respect, we are not entirely certain that what we have is a recorded version of the way in which the Italian peasant of the 12th, 11th, and 10th century spoke, as opposed to a Latin-educated clerk writing out the vocabulary and writing it in Latinate form. Much the same way when we have emerging dialects, even in this day and age, when we have to transcribe them, we use our existing standard language to spell those words, to form the grammar of it. So we're not absolutely certain that what we hear when we read it out loud is what would have been spoken then, but it's a really good indicator of the divergence of the two languages. And eventually, as I say, the vernacular will take its own place on parchment and will receive its value and its validation in that respect. So apart from, to come back to your question about different levels of society, the use of parchment, the use of vellum, is an indicator of the value of the content. There's any number of ways. You know, binding is I mean, you can make them into scrolls, obviously, tie them with red tape, which was the preferred way of the papacy, hence the expression red tape. Often they would simply bind them by lacing. So any number of ways, depending upon the way in which, frankly, depending upon the size of the document. Then, as I say, rolls, you know, something we're so familiar with seeing for great declarations, etc., is much more portable as a roll. You just put them in a bag, you know, behind you, carry them around, or store them in almost, you know, in not so as a shelf-like, but in a cubicle, so they can be stored that way. Which of course comes to that whole question of storage and cataloging parchments in medieval libraries is extremely difficult to find what's in a medieval library, because of course they didn't have a Dewey Decimal System, they didn't have the Library of Congress system. Most libraries had their own systems of storage, but shorter documents are always easier rolled up as well. essentially to close the document and ensure that it would be read only for the intended recipient. Sometimes it was an indicator of the genuine nature of the document, because a seal was, first of all, again, go back to product. Seals would be either a ring or a seal, which you had. So who possessed such items were the persons of import. And the creation of this wax seal, which was sort of halfway between a glue and a wax, ensures that when that document arrives in its intended recipient, the recipient can look at it immediately and know whether or not it's been opened. So you would seal something that was private. And again, for the validation of it, you put your seal on it to show this is the official seal of King or Emperor Frederick, etc., so that there was no question about the origin of the document as well. So twofold: number one, to seal it in the sense of close it and ensure that it's only read by those for whom it was intended, and secondly, to validate that this really did originate in King Frederick, and Emperor Frederick, or King Charles, etc. It's very expensive. You come across a parchment, irrespective of its, it's very expensive, very dear in the sense of quite rare to find them in popular circulation now, if they're genuine ones from the Middle Ages. So if you find them, irrespective of what the content is, there's probably value in picking it up. But I've seen that, the rising interest in medieval studies and medievalism, people are producing sealing wax and individual seals, as well as parchment, as well as vellum-type paper. I mean, you see that now when you go buy cardstock, vellum, like, okay, it's not vellum. They didn't use a calf for that. It's not actually parchment. There was no squirrel, goat, or sheep used in the production of this. So it's interesting to see that those terms parchment and vellum have found their way into paper making, which I think speaks to the value that those writing materials still occupy in the public imagination. And there's this image, of course, of the sealed parchment document rolled up containing, you ask, undying proclamations of love, etc., that they do belong to another time when writing in the written word was something much more precious. And in that respect, I think they continue to spark our imagination. And in that respect, that probably is its most enduring value.